Berg was born in Korea. Her house was bombed during the Korean War, and that's when she realized that it is people, not things, that are important in life. And she was not happy with the length of treatment, so she created an approach so that clients could solve their problems now rather than later. Married is Steve, I don't know how to say the last name, the Chasseur, I don't know. Their interest in solutions helped them to create solution-focused therapy. Wittgenstein believed that language shapes reality and that reality is always changing as a function of the interaction individuals have with others. Steve took Wittgenstein ideas and used them in the therapeutic setting. The Chasseur created what is known as the miracle question, which we will discuss later. And he became known as the man with the Occam razor, and that is the belief that more often than not, the simplest solution is the best solution. And they together here, Kim and Steve, learned that what works with one client might not work with another client. Solution-focused therapy focuses mostly on solutions, as well as clients' strengths, instead of focusing on the client's struggles or problems. People can find exceptions to their problems, and with those exceptions, they can find solutions to their problems. This approach believes that there is no such thing as a resistant client, only an inflexible therapist. In other words, the therapist is not asking the right questions. Solution-focused therapy supports quick change, and it believes that the client is the expert. When developing solutions, it is important to focus on the future and not in the past. The client, with the help of the counselor, can develop a problem-free language, which in turn will create a new reality for him or her. The solution-focused model believes that language is a key factor in the individual's development of reality. It is imperative that the therapist understands that the language that he or she uses will impact the client. Solution-focused therapy uses conversation to help the client shape what kind of life he or she wants to have and to help him or her find a way to accomplish it. This theory believes that there are only three types of clients. Visitors, they don't want to be in therapy. In this case, the therapist has the task of showing the client how he or she might benefit from therapy. The complainer, it is a client that wants help but doesn't know how to find a solution for his or her problems. Here, the therapist has to help the client come up with realistic goals. This is achievable goals, and to find exceptions to their problems. And then customers are ready to work on therapists should not see clients' problems as pathological. Instead, he or she should take a non-judgmental stance by understanding that no one's reality is better. We just have different realities. Solution-focused therapy believes that individuals that have not been able to change, it's because they haven't found an available mechanism to do so, not because they are incapable This approach views clients, couples, and families as being stuck. Because of this, the therapist's responsibility is to help them try something different than what they have been doing before that was not working. Like it was mentioned before, solution-focused therapists focus on clients' strengths and on helping clients to come up with their preferred goals. The solution-focused therapist will help his or her client recognize that their life has not always been full of problems. Instead, he or she has to recognize that there have been times when they have dealt with their issues in a successful manner. If the client is motivated to change, the therapist will help him or her to identify more frequent, predictable, and controllable exceptions. Goals should be small, concrete, and achievable. Solution-focused therapy basic assumptions are: the change is constant. The SFBT therapists see change as an opportunity. Clients can test out new behaviors as they change the direction of their life so that they can accomplish their goals. If it ain't broken, don't fix it. The solution-focused therapist does not make assumptions about underlying issues and does not try to change behaviors that the client doesn't think of as problematic. If it works, do more of it. If it's not working, do something different. Clients come to us with resources and strengths. Clients are the experts, not the counselor. They are the only ones that know what has been working for them and what has not been working. Small steps can lead to big changes. There is not necessarily a logical relationship between the solution and the problem. SBFT focuses on fixing the problem by focusing on solutions, not on the problem itself. The language for solution development is different from that needed to describe a problem. SBFT uses an optimistic tone, it's future-oriented, and it is positive and hopeful. No problem happens all the time. There are exceptions that can be used. Everyone has times when there are exceptions to their problems. The therapist will help the client figure out what is different in the client's life during those exceptions. and find new solutions using this information. The future is both created and negotiable. Everyone is responsible for their own life, and the therapist can help his or her client create a new future. Therapeutic techniques. The client will be asked to pay attention to any changes that might happen between the time they made the appointment and the time they show up for therapy. The therapist should show curiosity, respect, and acceptance. The therapist should also listen to the client and show empathy. The client can talk about the problem, but this should not be extensive, and the conversation should be moved to a solution talk. The therapist should be humble and not act as the expert. One example of this is using phrases such as "correct me if I'm wrong" or "I would guess that." There are different types of questions a therapist can ask. Preferred goal questions: what the client is hoping his or her future will look like. The purpose of solution-focused therapy is to help individuals reach their preferred goals. It is important that the client has an idea of how life will look when he or she reaches his or her preferred goals, and how long it will take to reach said goals. One example of those questions would be, how would you know when things get better? Evaluative questions: what the client is doing and what is working and what is not working for him or her. The focus of these questions is on things that happen at least a little helpful when the client tries to solve problems or issues. One example is, what about reading self-help books has helped you with your depression? Coping questions: how the client has coped in the past with problems or issues. These are questions that make assumptions that there have been times when the problem wasn't affecting the client as much as it is now. One example is, what ways have you found exception-seeking questions when exceptions to the problem have happened? Find out what is happening in the client's life when he or she is not experiencing the problem. One example of those questions would be, what was going on in your life when you did not feel depressed? And solution-oriented questions: how the client's life would be if the problem did not exist. Example, how would your life look different if you were not depressed? Ideas, not techniques. The therapist will discover what the client wants to accomplish. Example, what do we need to talk over today to enable you to feel that this meeting has been worthwhile? Problem-free talk. The therapist will listen closely to the client, adding problem-free words such as, so you want things to be better. How would that look when it begins to happen? It is important to talk about what the client wants instead of talking about what they don't want. Amplification. The therapist will amplify client success by encouraging him or her to talk about solutions that have worked for him or her. One example of this would be, that's a really interesting way of changing your life. How exactly do you think that materialized for you? Complementing. Therapists will use complementing to encourage clients in their continued efforts at solution building. Reframing. The therapist can reframe his or her client's understanding of his or her problems by offering alternative ways of looking at mental disorders. The therapist points out the positive aspects of what they call personality styles instead of personality disorders. Scaling questions. Ask clients to rate where they feel they are on a scale of 1 to 10. On the scale, 1 represents the worst that the problem has been, and 1 represents what life would look like after the miracle happened. Example, what would it take between now and the next session for the family to be able to move up the scale and get closer to their goal? Families might have different ratings, and when this happens, the therapist should assist the family in looking at these differences because they usually highlight important clues to both increase and maintain progress. And now the therapeutic process. The therapist asks the client to look at changes between the time where he or she set the appointment and the appointment itself. Stage 1, forming a collaborative relationship. The therapist believes that the client has the strengths and resources he or she needs to come up with their own preferred goals. The therapist helps the client find his or her own strengths and resources. Stage 2, describing the problem. This therapy believes that problems only need to be talked about for about 15 minutes Stage 3, assessment of family dynamics. The therapist listens for exceptions within the family system that provide possibilities to solutions. It is helpful to ask the family about times when the problem is not happening. Stage 4, goals. The therapist helps the client to be specific when setting goals. They should be obtainable Stage 5 is amplifying change. The therapist can help the client evaluate their progress by using scaling. The goals can be changed if it's necessary. The therapist reinforces his or her client by being an attentive listener, by showing empathy, and by complimenting the client's efforts. Stage 6